NBA free agencies in 2 days. The Pacers roster will be shaken up in 2 days. Going to give you a little overview primer of the big news surrounding the Pacers today and early this week. How much cap space does the team actually have for resources to sign players? What's the deal with Oshae Brissett and his option due tomorrow? And how this Nets drama plays into what the Pacers could do this week. We'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we're continuing breaking down some big free agency topics and some important ones to know as a fan to get ready to absorb this week and what the Pacers might do. Big week for them as the roster continues its reshuffling after the draft last Thursday. They'll have a lot to handle with free agency starting on the 30th, 31st, with the first, whatever you want to call it. There's a moratorium. It doesn't matter. Signings will start coming up Thursday. That's in 2 days. So all the relevant information about the Pacers needs to be sorted out by then. So today we'll talk about what the Pacers' resources really are, because I see a lot of people talking about the Pacers' cap space, and I think everybody's talking about it wrong. And I want to talk about that and why I think that you can expect to see the Pacers do a little more minor optionality moves at the beginning of free agency before doing anything big. Number two, we'll talk about Oshae Brissett, whose free agency really starts tomorrow. His decisions will be made by Wednesday. So why is that important? What does it mean for the Pacers in free agency? And we'll talk about the Nets today. Kyrie Irving made his decision. He's opting in to play with the Nets. What does all this mean for the Pacers? How does this play into Indiana's plans as free agency? Because today, if you're the Pacers and you see Kyrie returning to the Nets, it's actually a very big thing for the Pacers. I'll cover it in the third segment today. Let's start with something that I have seen very, very incorrectly reported about the Pacers quite often this offseason. How much cap space do the Pacers have? The big thing for a team improving in the NBA or trying to is signing players, signing better players, getting better players on your team. And typically cap space is described as the way to get them. So let's talk about what the Pacers' current situation is and what cap space really does. Because if you're the Pacers, Miles Bridges, maybe, DeAndre Ayton, maybe, Colin Sexton, maybe, there are a few names that I would say if you can get them as the Pacers on a not super expensive deal, yeah, you go do that. They match your timeline, they're good, and they're young. But all those guys either seem really likely to return to their team or would take a huge offer to lure in free agency away from the team they're currently on, and perhaps an overpay. But regardless of your opinion of those players, there's not a lot of reasons for the Pacers to necessarily want to get a ton of cap space this summer. So I want to talk about how much cap space the Pacers actually have, why it's being reported the way it is, and what I think is going to actually happen with their salary cap sheet in free agency. Because as free agency opens, as of right now, this is going to sound extremely confusing, but bear with me. The Pacers are actually over the salary cap by a lot. They're about $26 million over the salary cap in terms of cap space per my numbers as of right now. My numbers might be a little off what you see on the internet. I'm very confident in most of them, but $2 here or there, a difference in some contracts, whatever. They're actually over the salary cap. Here's why. So actual guaranteed contracts on their team, only about $90 million right now, right? Amongst about 10 players. But what there is out there is something called a cap hold for players who are free agents, who are entering free agency. And that number counts against the salary cap, and that allows teams to re-sign players and stay over the cap with bird rights, right? So Ricky Rubio, who's a free agent for the Pacers, has a cap hold on the Pacers books. TJ Warren does. Jalen Smith does. Lance Stevenson does. Those guys count against the salary cap for the Pacers until the Pacers re-sign them or until they sign with a different team. Or the Pacers can just renounce the cap hold and say, we don't want this. So they don't really need Lance Stevenson's cap hold to do anything. His cap hold's the minimum. Jalen Smith's cap hold is sort of meaningless to them as well. But Ricky Rubio and TJ Warren's are huge. And if you cut those cap holds, you cannot sign and trade that guy anymore. But it frees up cap space of that amount. So the Pacers have to decide if they want those cap holds to be able to sign and trade Warren and Rubio, which could be good. That's a way for the Pacers to grab assets this offseason. Or if they want to cut those cap holds and convert that into cap space, which is sort of an easy decision to do. They could just say, you know what, we'd rather have space. So that is why the Pacers are over the cap, air quotes, when entering free agency. It looks like, as of right now, they're going to be an over the cap team. Now let's talk about why I think that's actually better than being under the cap team. I know that's very confusing. So if you are under the salary cap by any amount, whatever it is, that is how much money you have to spend on players. You have that amount and something called the room exception, which allows you to sign a player for about $5 million. If you are over the salary cap, you have all your trade exceptions and all your salary cap exceptions to sign players. What is the difference here? Well, if you go under the salary cap, you lose your trade exceptions and you have a much smaller mid-level to add a player. So let me break this down from a Pacers perspective specifically. If the Pacers stay over the salary cap when free agency opens up, they will have the following tools to add players to their team. The non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is valued at over $10 million in free agency. If they are over the cap, they could sign a free agent not on their team to a $10 million deal. They also have Jeremy Lamb's trade exception worth over $10 million. They could just bring in a player from another team that makes that much money. They could do that to get an asset. They could do that to get a player. They could do that to make a lopsided trade. They have that. They have a $7.3 million trade exception from trading away Doug McDermott to the Spurs last summer. They have another small trade exception from Aaron Holiday. I think they used that one actually. From another small trade they made during the season, Edmund Sumner. There it is. I couldn't remember. For about $2 million. They also have the biannual exception, worth about $4 million on a 2-year deal. So that's 5 exceptions, 3 trade exceptions, taxpayer mid-level, and the biannual that total more than the maximum cap space the Pacers could have. So yes, they cannot combine those exceptions. They cannot say, we want to sign one player using all these. But they have 5 ways to add a player from another team that totals more value in salary than what they could get in cap space. That might seem confusing, but if the Pacers stay over the cap, the total resources they have, and I could even be forgetting some exceptions because, quite frankly, there are a lot, and they could get another trade exception for trading Brogdon, for example, or Rubio or Warren. But currently the value of the Pacers' salary cap exceptions is higher in total value than the maximum cap space they could easily get without making a trade. And so I get how the Pacers could have max cap space, and I will talk about their cap space in a second. But I actually think it's better for the Pacers to have zero cap space. I think it's better for them to stay over the salary cap in free agency and use those exceptions to bring guys in. Use their non-taxpayer mid-level. Use their trade exceptions. Iron out their team. They could dip under the salary cap after doing that. Sounds great to me. But those seem like smart decisions to me unless they're pursuing a max guy. Now, let's go back to the salary cap. How much room could the Pacers have? Because Ricky Rubio's cap hold is huge. It's $26.7 million. TJ Warren's is $19 million. That is $45 million. You could slash that away, just those two guys. And the Pacers could already be at about $20 million in space, a little less than that. That's super easy to do. They don't have to trade anybody else. They don't have to cut any other cap holds. They don't have to do anything. And that's really easy. So if you see a report about the Pacers having a lot of cap space, that's what they're talking about, is the Pacers just cutting those two cap holds and saying, we're not signing trading Ricky Rubio. We're not signing trading TJ Warren. We're going to use this space instead. And if the Pacers are signing a player for a contract worth more than $10 million in free agency, that's the route they will take. That is how they will do it, most likely, barring no trades. So the Pacers right now, they can do both of those things at once. Renouncing a cap hold to get Ricky Rubio and TJ Warren's money off their salary cap, boom. It's that easy. They call the league and they make it happen. It's that easy. So they can kind of do both at once, which is what makes their free agency so fascinating and why it's important to note, and why I'm sharing this extremely dense information with everybody, is the Pacers could have no cap space for all of free agency. They could also have a lot, and they can do both options at the same time. And if they try to sign a guy for a deal over $11 million that requires cap space, they can do that. And if they fail in that pursuit and they say, okay, let's pivot to cheaper players and use our exceptions, they can do that and stay over the cap and have those exceptions lasting all season. They keep their trade exceptions that way, and suddenly they have more options throughout the season, right? Jeremy Lamb's trade exception lasts until the coming trade deadline in February of 2023. If they keep it into the season, they could take on money during the season, right? These things all are important value propositions. Do you want to sign a $12 million player to lose all these trade exceptions? Probably not if you're the Pacers. So they have options. They can decide to stay over the cap. And currently the Pacers do not have any cap space. They are over the cap because of cap holds, because of who's on their team. They could decide to stay over. which is kind of what the Thunder did last year. They were paying players salary less than the salary cap, but they were over the cap. The Pacers are kind of in that position now, although to a much lesser extreme. But they could also very easily drop of a hat say, yep, we're dipping under the salary cap by 20 million, 25 million, whatever, and we're going to throw a ton of money at some free agent we love, and we got him, and great. And if they do that and it works out for them, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that what the Pacers' resources are entering free agency has been wildly misreported, wildly, this offseason. They do not have max salary cap space. They can get there, but it takes some moves. They are not there right now. They also they just don't have as much as people are saying they do. And to get as much as they would want, Jalen Smith's not coming back. TJ Warren's not coming back to Indiana. Ricky Rubio certainly not being signed and traded. Lance Stevenson probably not back. Like, there's a lot that has to slide around. Like, Dwayne Washington would probably be gone. Terry Taylor maybe. Like, to get to the money that you've seen printed in a lot of publications. So the Pacers currently, to sum it up, the Pacers are currently over the cap, and I think they should stay there to use all of these little tiny exceptions they have to bring in talent. But they also could very, very easily create a lot of cap space to make a signing if they ever need to. So, yes, that's extremely confusing because those sound like competing goals, but it's very easy for the Pacers to take two paths at once, and that is what I think their cap space situation is as we enter free agency. If you have any questions, happy to share cap numbers with you. I have not tweeted my cap sheet yet because there are some estimation numbers. Andrew Nembhard's contract isn't obvious. Neither is Kendall Brown's, but I'll share my estimated numbers with anyone who happens to ask. I'm on Twitter at TEastNBA. Let's talk about more consequential things and not just nerdy numbers. Oshae Brissett, team option, due June 29th. That decision is due from the Pacers. That's tomorrow. Holy cow. By the time you're listening to this, that might have already been decided on. Let's talk about that decision, how the draft changes it, how the Pacers' current situation matters in the context of what's going to happen with Brissett's team option, with free agency starting in just 2 days. But really quick, before that happens, I got to talk to you guys about the good people over at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. You got to get in there, endure the intimidating questioning from the guy behind the counter about the specs of your vehicle. You never know the answers. They don't have the part you need in the store, so they got to order it. They're going to order the brand that their warehouse happens to carry. You got to go back and get it. It's a huge pain. Stop dealing with that. Order parts on your phone, on your computer, wherever, from rockauto.com. You'll save time. You'll save money. The two most valuable resources on planet Earth. Who doesn't want more of those? rockauto.com, family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are always reliably low for everybody, and they have everything you could need for your vehicle. Whatever part you need, whatever thing you need, they got it. Go explore their easy-to-use website today. Find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Seriously, amazing week at Locked On Pacers last week for draft coverage. One of the best weeks in the history of this podcast. I hope I'm giving you guys what you want for coverage. Let me know if you ever want anything more, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen every single day, continuing to pump out great content. With free agency approaching, for your second listen, Locked On NBA is the place to go. I'm on with Matt Moore today. You can hear me and Matt talk about the latest on Kyrie Irving and the Nets, Jalen Brunson's free agency, DeJounte Murray, John Wall. We got it all there for you on Locked On NBA. Let's talk more about the Pacers, though, and specifically Oshae Brissett, who will be the highlight of the week for the Pacers until Thursday. What are they going to do with Oshae Brissett? He's the only player on the Pacers with an option, which means the decision on what the Pacers are going to do with him is due by Wednesday. He's a team option. What does that mean? So the Pacers have the option to pick up Oshae Brissett's contract for next season at $1.8 million. They could send a memo to the league that says, hey, a memo, that's not even the right word. They send a note to the league that says, hey, we're picking up his option. We want Oshae Brissett on our team next season on the contract he's currently on. That's not really what it says, but that's what it means. And boom, Oshae Brissett's on the Pacers at $1.8 million next season. They could also decline his option at $1.8 million and say, hey, this contract's over. It's done. You don't even actually have to send a note to decline an option. But anyway, they could do that as well. So that is the decision facing the Pacers. The deadline for that decision is the 29th, one day before free agency. That's the deadline, the last possible day All those options can be during this current league calendar. Why does this matter? Well, it seems like if you just zoom out and say, well, Oshae Brissett's 24 and really good, and the Pacers didn't draft any forwards, and he might start given the current state of their roster, and he's athletic, and they're trying to be more athletic, seems like they should want him. But if they decline his team option now, Oshae Brissett's a restricted free agent this summer, assuming they give him a qualifying offer. The deadline for that is also Wednesday. And if they pick up the team option, he's an unrestricted free agent next summer, meaning he could sign with any team, and the Pacers would not have match rights. Whereas in restricted free agency this summer, if Brissett signs with another team, the Pacers can match the deal and keep him. So if the Pacers, ironically, decline Brissett's team option this summer, they guarantee they can keep him next season and probably beyond. And if they pick up his team option, they can guarantee him for next season, but less obvious on the beyond. So that's the decision they have to make. How much do they think they can keep Brissett? How much do they trust they can keep Brissett one summer from now? Do they want to negotiate now versus later? How does this all play into free agency? These are the questions they'll have to answer. I'm sure they know their answer already. It's not like anything so dynamic can happen to their roster in one day that would change things. But that is the decision that will hit the Pacers before free agency actually starts. And I've done a whole podcast on this, as I have with several of the Pacers entering free agency. So if you want to hear that, it was back in May, actually. But we talked about all the factors at play here for the Pacers. But now the draft is over. Free agency landscape settling in a little bit. Pacers goals becoming more clear as they talk about, the longer term planning they're going to have. Kevin Pritchard talked about it at the presser, and the athleticism they're chasing via the draft, picking two athletic dudes in Kendall Brown and Benedict Mathurin. How does this all play into Brissett? Well, he's athletic and he's young. That fits the vision the Pacers seem to want long term. Talked to Rick Carlisle about Oshae at the press conference in which the Pacers announced all the new rookies. I said, hey, he's got this team option. What do you think's going on here? And Rick basically said, yeah, Oshae's young and talented. We want him on the team next year. And so I think Oshae will be on the Pacers this next season, but I don't think Carlisle's answer gave me any indication on what path the Pacers will go here. But the Pacers have to make this decision by Wednesday, pick up the option, decline the option, and then the type of free agency Brissett goes through is determined by that decision, assuming they give him a qualifying offer by Wednesday. If it were me, the draft has a little impact here. Not a ton, but a little bit, because the Pacers did not draft a forward at all. Maybe they sign one in free agency. Maybe they don't. They have some guys who can slide up to the 3 and some bigs who can slide down to the 4. They don't have a ton of roster spots left. Who knows how they get more forwards on the team. But if they don't sign any, they really need Brissett to play this year and beyond. And he is a valuable player to have anyway. If you can lock up your starting 4 for one season, then your backup 4 for 2 seasons after at like $5 to $7 million per season right now, do it. Heck yeah, that's a great deal for any basketball franchise as a starter. That deal is cheap enough that even if Oshae Brissett gets injured or totally fails and busts out or forgets how to play or gets super badly injured, that's not that crippling. You can move off that. You can move that in a big deal. It doesn't really matter. Jeremy Lamb signed his contract under a similar situation. Sort of. Not really. But Jeremy Lamb signs with the Pacers 3 for 31 or whatever it was, 31 and a half. And the deal kind of was, hey, you will start until Oladipo comes back from his injury, and then you will come off the bench the whole time. Right? That can sort of be the thought to me when I think about how they negotiate with Oshae Brissett. Hey, we don't have any forwards right now. So, maybe you take a little less than what your market value might be, but you can start for us this whole coming season. We don't have a lot of forwards. You can grow with this young team, and then as we seek out improvement and keep our rebuild going, we still want you on the team, but maybe in a more natural role for you as a sixth man kind of forward, a seventh man forward, whatever they view him as. And then that way they have him under contract for a long time. He can settle into the right role, get the money he wants, and show himself on a big stage. That makes sense as a starter being that big stage. That makes sense to me as a negotiation point. And the Pacers have all the cards. Brissett has no power on this decision. But the other factor here is there's no real value in the Pacers having extra cap space by declining his option. If they could get something else in the difference between a minimum and him making $5 million, yeah, maybe they'd want him on the minimum. But they have so much space, and they have all these exceptions if they stay over the cap, like I talked about in the first segment. that it's very low opportunity cost to just give him a pay raise right now, right? You're not likely to be missing out on anything if you're the Pacers by doing that. And so, to me, it's a no-brainer. They should decline his team option and negotiate with him in restricted free agency this summer. But I get why they wouldn't. A minimum guy is nice. They'll have his full bird rights next summer. If you're Brissett, you can be unrestricted. He's not so good that you'd be devastated to not do him a favor and let him be unrestricted next summer. I get why they would pick up the team option, but I think the Pacers should decline it and negotiate with Brissett as a restricted free agent. That deadline is Wednesday. We'll see what happens. Also on Wednesday is the deadline for teams to issue qualifying offers to guys who will be restricted free agents. So I think you'll find out about both of those transactions from the Pacers in one fell swoop with what they do there. If they decline it and send him a QO, if they pick it up, whatever, I think you'll hear that in one motion. In theory, if Dwayne Washington or Terry Taylor gets slashed down and non-guaranteed, they could get a qualifying offer. That's not going to happen. Also, Nate Hinton and Gabe York from their two-way spots could get a qualifying offer and go into restricted free agency. That deadline is Wednesday. We'll hear about all that stuff again by the end of tomorrow. If you're listening on Tuesday, if you're listening in the future, by the 30th or by the 29th, excuse me. I would guess that Brissett has a good chance to get a qualifying offer as a restricted free agent, and I would guess none of the rest of the guys get one. I would guess that Dwayne and Terry stay on their current contracts, and I would guess both two-way players, Gabe York and Nate Hinton, go into unrestricted free agency, and the Pacers have new two-way guys going into next season. But we'll see. Anything could happen. Carlisle is a fan of Nate Hinton. York's been working out with some of these Pacers guys in the facilities all summer. Maybe they want to keep those guys around. But I would guess, with these two-way guys who aren't obviously talented or anything, that they'll be unrestricted free agents. We'll see what happens, though. The Pacers have until Wednesday to make these calls. Maybe their team situation changes between now and then. But I would guess Brissett, team option declined, qualifying offer sent his way. All the rest of the guys can stay on their current contract situation entering next season. Let's talk about the Brooklyn Nets on this Pacers podcast, because they were about to be a big problem for the Pacers. And now they're much less of a problem for the Pacers, but they still have ripple effects around the league. Kyrie Irving says, hey, I'm going to opt out and go to another team, and then he opts in. How does this all impact the Pacers? Well, let me tell you in this third segment today. But before we do that, I want to talk to you guys about BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs. Congrats to the Avs, Major League Baseball, MMA fighting, all of it. They've got it there. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They've got odds up for NFL opening night already. Colts favored by over 8 points against Houston in that opening game. That is crazy. But the Colts totally deserve it. They look like they're going to be better than the Texans this year. You can find those lines over at betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. To continue the theme for this third segment, I'm going to request your second listen be Locked On Nets to hear about the crazy days in Brooklyn going on right now as Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant dominate the NBA media landscape these days. They are the story of the summer, although no longer, at least for now. So to tell this story and how it impacts the Pacers, we have to go back a couple days in time, not that far back. We have to go back a little bit to talk about this. So Kyrie Irving has a player option, $37 million next season. If he picks it up, he'd make it $37 million under contract with the Nets. If he turns it down, he's an unrestricted free agent. He can sign anywhere. And suddenly the buzz hits. Hey, the Nets don't want to pay him a ton of money. They don't want to give him a longer-term deal. They don't want to extend his contract at all. Kyrie wants that, to stay with the Nets. He wants that assurance that he's going to stay. And if he leaves or decides that they can't agree on anything and he opts out, Kevin Durant might request a trade. And all of a sudden, the entire NBA landscape's like, oh my gosh, Kyrie Irving, not a lot of teams wanted him. But if Kevin Durant's available for a 4-year deal, one of the best players in the league, oh my gosh, every team would have been tripping all over themselves to give at least an offer for him. So the NBA kind of paused while teams kind of figured this out. And that's kind of what, to me at least, held back a few transactions from happening on draft night, or at least some swaps from making sense from happening on draft night. So this segment that you're listening to right now is going to be about how the Nets were going to be the dam holding everything back. I've talked about that on 1075 The Fan and Indy a few times as people asked about a lack of a Brogdon trade. But now this segment's not about that because the Nets are settled. And I said on 1075 The Fan, the best thing for the Pacers would be Kyrie Irving to return to the Nets because that means he is not switching teams. And that means a team that wants a point guard cannot get Kyrie Irving. He's one less available free agent. Kevin Durant's not on the move. All these teams that have assets that would want to trade still have those things, right? So Kyrie Irving staying, and to the extent that anyone can believe the words of Kyrie Irving at this stage of his life, and given what his last couple seasons have been, I get it. But to the extent that is something that exists, he did say to Shams that part of this agreement is like staying with the Nets for this coming season, like not getting traded anyway, opting in and playing for Brooklyn is part of it. The specific thing Shams said is Irving is bypassing on multiple opt-in and trade scenarios to fulfill his 4-year commitment to the Nets and Kevin Durant, right? So under that thought, the Nets part of the offseason is complete. It's now done. That dam that would hold back other big transactions. Maybe it's DeJounte Murray, maybe it's John Collins, maybe it's Malcolm Brogdon, whoever. That is now gone. Teams can at least less or so be worried about how the Nets shakeup will impact their plans this summer. So for the Pacers, it's a little easier and might be a little sooner that they can trade Brogdon in free agency now than it would have been because it's one less hurdle that has to be cleared. Kyrie does not have to pick his new team. Durant does not have to be traded, assuming Kyrie and KD are staying in Brooklyn, which it sounds like they are now. That is one less hurdle that has to be cleared before teams pivot to Brogdon. But here's why that's the case, right? If you're a team that needs a point guard in free agency, like Jalen Brunson, for example, you would like to get him with just your money and not have to trade away your stuff on your team. And then if you don't get him, then you pivot to a guy like Brogdon, where you might have to give up stuff, but you still get a similarly talented player, right? So shout out to Alex Golden over at Setting the Pace. Those guys have been killing it with the interviews this offseason. But he's got Point Guard Watch. He tweeted it out, right? Kyrie, John Wall, Jalen Brunson, Colin Sexton, Anthony Simons, all out there. DeJounte Murray apparently out there, right? Kyrie, he's settled. He's with the Nets. Wall's going to the Clippers. Sexton is restricted. Simons is restricted. It seems like Brunson is either Dallas or New York. Meanwhile, thank you, Alex, again for including the teams. It seems like need point guard depth. The Wizards have been connected to Brogdon. The Knicks, obviously. The Lakers have nobody. Dallas, if they lose Brunson, is going to need one. Who knows what's going to happen with D'Angelo Russell in Minnesota? I like that inclusion from Alex. There are a lot of teams out there that could need point guard depth. Who's going to play if Delon Wright leaves Atlanta? Who's playing behind Trae Young, right? There's a lot of teams that could need point guard depth. What are the Pelicans going to do if DeJounte Graham stinks again? There's a lot of teams out there that could need one, and there's not that many available. If all those restricted guys, Sexton, Simons, return to their team, and Brunson's going to one of Dallas or New York, right? Because Kyrie and to a lesser extent John Wall are settled. I think once DeJounte Murray, if that trade is going to happen, once that's all done, Brogdon's the best guy, right? So the Nets, how it impacts the Pacers is by happening now, by being done before free agency starts. I think it will speed up the process of Brogdon getting traded. And now, if you would like to see Brogdon traded as a fan of the Pacers, what you are hoping happens the second free agency starts. The first deal you want to see reported is Jalen Brunson back to Dallas, 5 years, $110 million or whatever it's going to be, 4 for $100, whatever it has been reported to be. That's the first deal you want to see because then the Knicks still need a point guard and they didn't get Brunson and they have all the assets they got from the draft. So that is one example of how this impacts the Pacers because now the Knicks cannot pivot to Kyrie. They cannot pivot to other options, right? Brogdon becomes one of the better options. So that is how the Nets impact the Pacers because all this drama, obviously the Pacers probably weren't going to get Kyrie or KD, but that does sort of block the league or change the order of events that would happen. And so now by having the water flowing through the free agency pipeline as normal, there's no dam blocking all this stuff. That should, in theory, speed things up, and two, create a more robust potential market for Malcolm Brogdon. And if the Pacers want to trade Brogdon, what they are hoping for beyond Brunson returning to Dallas is a lot of these guys returning to the teams they're already on. So any team that needs a point guard or wants to acquire Brogdon now says, oh crap, none of the options out there came to us. So that is the spiel for me of how the Nets stuff impacts the Pacers. And ironically, what I was thinking this segment could be is, hey, if they lose Kyrie, they could become a Brogdon team, right? They could want him to pair with Ben Simmons, maybe even with Kevin Durant. But now it becomes, okay, they're settled. How will the rest of the league follow suit? And how will potentially Brogdon, I keep saying him because he's a point guard, but really any available trade piece from the Pacers, I think it'll now happen a little sooner, right? The first thing that'll happen in free agency is all the big guys will choose their teams and settle in. And then once teams figure out what the second wave is, do they want to sign a second wave player or trade for a first wave player? That's how this will all settle in order. And now that the top tier is mostly settled, the second tier stuff can go faster and easier and teams can plan better. And that is nice if you are the Pacers. So that is how the Nets impact the Pacers today. That segment changed very much in my notes throughout the day because Kyrie went from, hey, maybe he's going to the Lakers to just kidding. I'm staying with the Nets on my current contract. Thank you guys a ton for listening. I hope all this made sense because today's episode was a lot about how the NBA and timing and all this stuff matters, how all of it matters for every single team. And sometimes that can be a little in the weeds, but I think it's very important information to set the scene and lay the groundwork for what's going to happen for the Pacers this week. Tomorrow, Derek Schultz is going to join us. And we're going to talk about the Pacers free agency plans, what they should be trying to do, what this free agency period is going to potentially look like for them, the latest rumors to the extent any are out there, what the Pacers' goal should be, the primer, if you will, for Pacers free agency. Thursday, I'll be talking rumors as well. And Friday, the big day. Wowee, the floodgates are open. What happened? Who's a Pacer now? What does the team look like? We'll got it all for you coming. As usual on the Locked On Pacers podcast, you can yell at me or follow me on Twitter at TEastNBA. I say plenty of dumb things over there. And this podcast is at Locked On Pacers, where we can communicate very easily, or you can communicate with me via YouTube comment. This podcast is, in fact, available in video form on YouTube. Please subscribe. It's free. I hate promoting myself, but hey, it is free, and it does help me quite a bit. So thank you guys a ton for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show tomorrow again and the rest of the week talking free agency and the Pacers' new look roster. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.